So this is Professor Tony Kerzmann from the Mechanical Engineering and Materials Science Department, also the advisor to the Pitt Electric Propulsion Group. And I'm here to talk a little bit about electric vehicles and the future of renewable energy in the energy industry.
How has the rise of electric vehicles and other renewable energies changed the landscape of engineering industry today?
Yeah, so I think electric vehicles, as we know, are a way for us to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions posed by fossil fuel combustion, right? And the transportation sector is a large portion of the greenhouse gas emissions throughout the world. I will say the electric vehicles are still very early stages on the rise, right? So we still have a lot of work to do, but there's a lot of prospects also. I think Tesla has done a great job pushing the industry and showing that an electric vehicle can be, the fastest on the road. It can be easy to drive. It can even have autonomous features. There's a lot of cool things that Tesla has provided the industry that I think a lot of naysayers before Tesla were saying electric vehicles could never do. So they basically put the proof in the pudding. When it comes to electric vehicles, some of the interesting things to consider are electric vehicles in general are a lot cheaper to run and maintain. And what I mean by that is if you were to travel a certain distance with an electric vehicle, that same distance would cost about 3 times as much in a typical gasoline vehicle of the same size. Now, gas prices vary, so that's not perfect. In fact, gas prices right now are to the point where it would probably be larger than maybe 4-time cost difference. I own a plug-in hybrid Chevy Volt, and so for my car, it's a 40 miles on 10 kilowatt hour battery, and it cost me $1.20 to go 40 miles. So if I had and it's a smaller sedan, but if I had a similar vehicle, I'd be lucky to get 40 miles per gallon. So if that were the case, a gallon of gas is going to cost me $3.50 to $4. So for me to go 40 miles, it either costs me $1.20 in electric, or it costs me almost $4 in gasoline, right? So obviously big difference in cost there. There's also the fact that you've now removed a whole lot of different components from a typical gas-powered vehicle, right? So a gas-powered vehicle would have, you'd have a combustion system, right? You'd have the piston cylinder assembly, you'd have the transmission and drivetrain, and you'd have all kinds of different exhaust and maybe even turbochargers and things like that. You also have cooling systems and those kind of things. With an electric vehicle, you remove the majority of a lot of these complex parts, right? There are electric motors. The battery system itself can be pretty substantial, right, in size and cost, but you remove a lot of moving parts in the vehicle. So there's some advantages, and the reason I bring that up, for instance, you don't need to get an oil change, right? Most electric vehicles, I would say all electric vehicles, have a regenerative charging, so it reduces the amount of brake pad usage that you use, right? So there's a lot of advantages to electric vehicles beyond just being electrified and reducing greenhouse gases. Overall, operation, maintenance, and cost to drive are cheaper. Battery technology can be limiting, right? Because batteries are heavy, fairly heavy, at least compared to the energy density of gasoline, for instance. But those technologies, remember, they're still relative. We're relatively working through those different technologies. The gas-powered vehicle's been around for over 100 years, right? And people are expecting electric vehicles to be perfect in a few decades. Now, the technology's improving rapidly, but things like lithium and things like that, we don't necessarily have to use lithium-ion batteries. There's other options, and obviously there's a lot of research in that area. So, or improving lithium-ion batteries and things. So I think we'll see a lot of research and a lot of focus in the future on battery technology and other forms of energy storage. What else? One of the cool things with electric vehicles is you no longer have this big engine and components in the front, so you have what's called a frunk. Have you ever heard of a frunk?
No.
What the frunk is that? Yeah. Yeah. No, a frunk is a front trunk. So you basically have a whole bunch of space in the front of your vehicle. And there's been some, I was actually just reading an article about this, where the Ford Lightning, right, one of the first electric trucks to be offered, and I think you can actually put a down payment on it now, right, if you want to get into the Ford Lightning. But what they're doing is they're going to have a huge frunk, right? Not the whole, but a large portion of the front of the truck is going to be wide open. So what they did is they've been doing focus groups with different people that drive trucks, right? You can say, hey, we can put all kinds of outlets in the front of your truck and you can use it however you like. Well, if you've ever driven a truck, unless you have some extended cab or something like that, you don't have a whole lot of space to keep your things secure. So, you don't have a trunk to lock, right? That kind of thing. You can buy extra toolboxes and stuff like that to put in the back. But a lot of truck owners will put their belongings like under the seat, right? Or maybe if they do have an extended cab, they'll kind of throw it in the back seat. Well, with a frunk, you now have a place to put your items securely. And if you're using that truck to do things like construction or whatnot, you actually basically have a whole toolbox in the front of your vehicle. Not only a toolbox that has a battery supply. So you could plug in a bunch of your power tools right in the front of your truck, show up to a job site, lift up your hood, and next thing you know, you got all of your batteries charged up for your power tools, and you can always plug into that if you need other power as well. So there's some pretty cool advantages to electric vehicles, and I think as we start to see people really focus in on how these advantages are going to help the consumer, I think we'll see more and more electric vehicles, or let's say more of a positive perspective on electric vehicles. One last thing when it comes to the vehicle itself is what people don't realize, there's this thing called range anxiety. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Yeah. So range anxiety is when someone gets anxious because they're like, my electric vehicle only has 300 miles or whatever, 250 miles of charge or whatever, and after that I'm going to be stuck on the side of the road, right? Now that said, you can imagine most people don't drive 250 miles or 300 miles in a day. So whenever you plug your car in, you basically drive home, you'll plug it in at night in the garage. You'll leave the garage every single day with 300 miles on your vehicle. So if you think about it, if you have a gas-powered vehicle, which people are obviously used to nowadays, there's very rare times that you'll leave the garage with a full tank of gas, right? And so you can imagine, my wife never leaves the garage with a full tank of gas, right? So my point is people kind of get this thought like, oh, I'm going to run out of electricity, right? But really, if you think about it, you're leaving the garage with let's say a full equivalent of a tank of gas every time you leave in the morning. So unless you're going on a long road trip, you really shouldn't have to worry about something like range anxiety. Or maybe you travel really far for work. So that said, one of the disadvantages, and that's just one of the current disadvantages to the industry, is the lack of charging stations, right? Yeah. So you can imagine that, the lack of charging stations, and the speed at which charging occurs. So those are two areas. I mentioned earlier how the batteries are an area we need to really focus, research, and improve. But I think we need to improve the number of charging stations. So the recent infrastructure bill passed through the government recently. I think it has $7.5 billion earmarked for charging stations.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so we're looking at, the goal there is 400 to 500,000 additional charging stations throughout the U.S. And that would really electrify the vehicle infrastructure, right? So that's one thing. So that was the electrical vehicle charging.
I think that was pretty good for the yeah, thank you, by the way. That was really interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't I know a lot of that in regards to that. And thank you for all that information.
Yeah.
It's really crazy how yeah, people do expect it. I know there's a lot of like combat minerals. People aren't a huge fan of lithium right now.
Yeah.
But I know it's not going to take too long for them to get rid of lithium and more efficient batteries.
Yeah.
Less costly batteries.
Well, even with lithium, right? So they're mining it each year.
Yeah.
One of the trickiest parts and one of the really big focus right now is what do you do with the old batteries and how do you recycle them, right?
Yeah.
So this gets back to kind of well, not really renewable energy, but it gets back to sort of sustainability in that you're looking at a circular economy where you can take that lithium ion from the previous battery, recycle it, and use it in a new battery. Might not be 100% of it, depending on your recycling and things like that. But the goal there is to kind of continuously use the same lithium, and then when you're mining virgin lithium from the ground, you can continue to add that into the market.
That'd be interesting.
But you don't want to completely focus on always mining new lithium for new batteries and then dumping the old batteries in the garbage, right?
Yeah.
You don't want that kind of single stream focus. You want a circular economy focus.
Yeah. Also, we definitely need more charging stations. I think there's some parts in the West where there's 300 miles between the next charging station, and people I think one person got an electric generator that was fueled by gasoline and hooked it up to his car so that he could make it across that point. And it's like a cataract almost. Yeah. But if we did have more of that, people would be more encouraged to buy electric cars.
Well, think about this also, right? So right now, when you get gas, where do you have to go?
The gas station.
Yeah, you don't charge. I mean, you don't get gas in the middle of a city at a let's say a parking meter, right?
Yeah.
But in the future, there might not be any gas stations. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But there's going to be some sort of charging stations for the really high power stuff. But you might drive downtown and you might pay your parking meter and plug in right there,
yeah.
right? So there could be smaller charging stations all over the place. And really, it's as much as connecting to the grid. Now, you do have to have a certain voltage and current, right? Higher voltage, higher current to charge it quickly. But that said, you can imagine it would totally change the way we view, I want to say gas stations, obviously we're switching to electric, but the way we view charging or gassing up a vehicle. So that's another cool thing. But right now, even those high-speed DC Tesla superchargers, now they're working on newer technology, but you're looking at about 30 minutes or so just to charge the battery about 75%, right? So if you're on a long road trip and your battery holds, let's just say 300 miles or whatever, then you're going to have to stop somewhere for a half hour just to get another 225 back into it, right?
Yeah.
So there are some disadvantages still, but like I said before, we're a couple decades at most into not even a decade into the electric vehicle market, and I think we're going to be solving these challenges in the next decade. We're going to see most of these challenges solved pretty quickly.
And that time will reduce as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And we actually already touched up on the second question.
Oh,
but it's how do you see what do you see as the future of electric vehicles, and how do you think the Pittsburgh Electric Propulsion Club could help shape that future?
Yeah. So, the future of electric, I think, is highly combined, or let's say highly integrated with autonomous vehicles too. So, I think transportation as we know it is going to be in the next, maybe 2 decades is going to change drastically. We might not be sitting behind a steering wheel for an hour in a car. We might be, all facing the same center. Maybe there's a table in the middle of our quote-unquote vehicle, and we're all talking, or maybe we're all working on our laptops. I think even the idea of electric vehicles being a personal ownership will change drastically as well. Why do I have to take up a quarter of my house in a 2-car garage when I don't really need to own a vehicle, right? So in the case of an autonomous vehicle fleet, I could pay a monthly payment, and the autonomous vehicle would pick me up and bring me to work in the morning, right? And I would never need to maintain it. I wouldn't have to pay for the electric. I wouldn't even need a garage in my house. So I think the future of electric vehicles, including that autonomous feature, is really bright. I know myself, I would much rather be hanging out and either doing some work, checking some emails, or talking to someone in a vehicle, not having to keep my eyes on the road and not having to sit behind a steering wheel for my commute to and from work, right? So I think that's a really cool aspect. I think that's something that people really need to think about, how it's not so much the electric vehicle, maybe that's a little bit more autonomous, but autonomous and electric vehicles I think will be a common combination in the future. As far as the PIT EP, I think one of the things I really like the idea of, I love that you guys are hopping right into a competition. I think competition brings out the best in innovation. Now, obviously, you're probably going to want to continue to focus, or you're going to want to focus maybe a little bit more on the land vehicle side versus.
Yeah, well, we're going to expand the club into
Yeah.
multiple electronic competitions.
That's great. No, I think that's great, and I think that's actually a great path forward. One way that might be useful is if you were to, and again, I don't know exactly how you want to expand, but there might be a good idea to have a, let's say, research/innovation arm in your group. I know you guys have talked about, for instance, the hydrofoil, right?
Yeah.
And so there's probably some pretty cool ways that you could maybe extend out a hydrofoil and bring it back in or whatever, and have different technologies that would improve the efficiency of an electric boat in that case, right? But I think if you thought of it as you maybe have a competition group for electric land vehicles, electric water vehicles, and then maybe you have either an autonomous arm, right? Because I think there's a lot of pretty cool companies that are, for instance, there's a autonomous sail company. They basically have a solar powered sailboat that's anywhere from 33 to 72 feet long, and it travels the world and it collects a bunch of data. So a lot of researchers are using these things. Instead of having to take a huge research vessel that can cost tens of thousands of dollars a day just to run and have all this maintenance and have all these people working on it, they can send out a few of these drones. So I think that would be a really cool space. I also think as you guys begin to master electric vehicles, I think it would be really cool to think about how you could use those to help society. So one interesting way, at least in my mind, is you could think about an autonomous solar-powered electric vehicle. You would have to basically, I guess, adapt it for off-road, but it could be a tree planting, or it could be a maintenance type vehicle for, you've heard of the Billion Tree Project, right? So could you imagine if you deploy 1,000 autonomous tree planting rovers, and you guys have kind of developed that, right? So I think maybe a car and a truck are definitely electric vehicles, but there's a bunch of different other options there. And I think the idea of having artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles combined with the electric vehicle piece would be some really cool projects. Now there might not be existing competition, so you'd have to kind of choose what projects you want to work on, but I think that would be really neat.
Yeah. I didn't realize how many possibilities there are with that.
Yeah.
And that would definitely interest a lot of people. Like some people like coding more, some people like autonomous vehicles more.
Yeah.
All right. So what does the support of companies involved in the industry mean to student competition teams like the Pittsburgh Electric Propulsion?
Yeah, so I think industry partners are really important on a number of ways. The most obvious one is they help support you financially, even support you with different software or hardware, and even support when it comes to expertise, right? Because usually these industry companies have some stake or interest in what you're doing, right? And so they also have expertise in that area. So those kind of connections can be really synergistic for both groups, right? I mean, I think you can definitely help out a industry, let's just say an industry company or supporter by doing certain projects for them and doing certain research and things like that, and they can help you out with expertise and other financial support. The other thing is, it's a clear pipeline for graduation and potential job support, right? So you can imagine, obviously, if you're doing a good job in their area, they might say, hey, we'd love to have you as a co-op or an intern, and then at that point they might offer you a full-time position. So I think those relationships are really helpful. Pushing forward, though, like you can imagine, those kind of relationships can even lead to longer-term research projects, grant funding opportunities. So I think it's beyond just kind of thinking of it in terms of they give us money and help us with competitions, right? I think depending on which direction you want to go in the future, there's a lot of opportunity to expand those relationships and turn them into, let's say, larger scale projects. So I think there's also the idea of, an industry, once they get to know you and have that established relationship with you, there's also the opportunity to have that relationship with Pitt, right? So not all of these companies are, let's say, well known by the faculty and other things. So it could lead to, let's say, larger scale relationships with, could be the department, could be the school, could be the whole university, right? So there's there's some pretty cool ties there as well. Yeah, and then the simple idea of, once you have that relationship established, you can then talk about different projects. Like we talked about a few random ideas, and those are kind of off the top of my head, but you can imagine those companies might be able to support, or maybe they'll come to you and say, hey, we have this really neat project we need you guys to work on, right? So, industry relationships I think are very important on a number of different ways. But for students, it's definitely the support for the group is very important, and then I think the relationship is really helpful when it comes to internships, co-ops, and future job proposition. Yeah.